Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Tripping on Legends, your campfire in the crossroads. Never scripted, but always well researched. It's funny because I was thinking, like I've been watching a lot of shows lately and listening to podcasts, and most of them that do what I do, there's a script that's going on, and they're talking, and I've been really getting into Mr. Ballin lately, and I'm like, if someone, there's no script on the show, but if someone were to actually like look at my notes, they would much more think of me as John Doe from Seven than any kind of serious researcher. I am Christopher Balzano. You are listening to episode 105. I know the numbers are getting really crazy in that we've had to cancel some shows and things like that. This is 105, named A Good Ghost is Hard to Find, a little bit of a play on one of my favorite short stories of all time, which of course we will get into in a little bit. But before we do, I want to encourage people. I'm hoping that people are enjoying what I've been putting out there on our social media. If you want to follow us on social media, we are at Facebook, at facebook.com/trippingonlegends. We are at Spooky Tripping on Instagram, and Spooky Balzano on Twitter. And of course, our major our major drive to people is getting the podcast out there. So if you're listening on iTunes, if you're listening on Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts, please rate and subscribe. Let people know what we're doing out there. I'd like to think I've been spending a lot of time in research mode, looking into other sources and looking into what other people are doing. And I think we offer something unique, and I just want to, if you enjoy the show and it's getting out there, tell people about it, because this is the way that we get stories, and especially as I start the project that I'm working on this summer, which both the stories that we have tonight are part of that, and hopefully they're close enough that I can actually go and visit them maybe this week. I need to know what's going on outside of Florida, right? I need to know people's stories, because this is a show that is driven by people, right? People are the ones who get involved in the legend trips. They're the ones who spread the tales, and so this is really the show of the people. Before we actually get to these two stories tonight, first of all, I want to say Ella is not here with me tonight. However, I am drinking from her mug, so she'd be represented. This is her Mothman mug. I needed this much coffee to get me through this episode tonight. Don't tell her. Don't tell her what's going on. But I also wanted to, actually, before I get into this stuff, I wanted to get into that we are starting this week. Hope, hope, hope. I know we've been promoting it. I know we've been saying it. 1 Minute Myths is starting on TikTok. So if you go to TikTok, Tripping on Legends, subscribe to us there. And in between all the really weird things that you're going to see on TikTok, you can also get our 1 Minute Myths. And if you've got a 1 Minute Myth to share or any kind of legend to share, please get in touch with us on the show. I wanted to announce a few things, the first of which is a really big announcement. June 6th, for those of you guys who've been following my adventures throughout the Ocala and sharing the Ocala stories, June 6th, the book is officially out. Yes, after 2 years of research, putting it down, picking it back up again, getting frustrated, getting inspired, getting it out there, getting it edited, Haunted Ocala National Forest is going to be released on June 2nd. It's crazy because it's another Haunted America book, which are extremely popular. So you're going to be able to see me in CVS and Walmart even more, or Walgreens, I should say, even more. In addition to that, there are a ton of events coming out. I mentioned all our social media platforms. Follow me on social media, because we have a lot of big things coming out. On April 30th, I'll be going up to Orlando on the cusp of the National Forest, the Ocala, to participate in the Orlando Book Festival. I've been asked to be one of the speakers. I think I'm the only ghost person that's going up there. I'm not quite sure who the speakers are, but in addition to that, later on that month, June, we are planning to go back to where it all began. We are trying to plan a huge event at the Astor Library, the place where I first learned about the Ocala, the place where 5 years ago, we went in to talk about ghosts and we realized that they knew more about it than I could ever tell them. It's the birthplace of that story. It's the birthplace of my obsession with the Ocala, and we are going back there I'm tentatively saying it's on the day after my son's birthday on June 18th. We're going to be planning an event. I will put more information out there, so make sure you're following us. I also wanted to put the word out on June 4th. I am going to be traveling all the way up 41, which is like 30 minutes, 20 minutes, to participate in the Southwest Florida Skunk Ape Convention. It's going to be in Punta Gorda this year. It is June 4th, and it is going to be a really big event. So I'm hoping that everyone can come out. Sheely from the Skunk Ape Museum is going to be there. He's like one of the big draws. Stacy Brown and Robert Robinson, who are friends of the show, we're going to be there. RPG from Finding Bigfoot's going to be there. Thomas Sinclair, Connor Flynn, and then of course Patrick Webb and Mark Muncy are also going to be there. We'll put information about and links to it in the show notes. You guys can click into it. Or you can just go to Facebook and type in Southwest Florida Skunk Ape Conference. It's the only one that's going to show up. But that is June 4th. The last thing is, I just wanted to let everybody know that I am, thank you, Lorene, that I am officially writing for American Paranormal Magazine. So in addition to running a monthly segment, which is, I'm thinking about alternating between haunted love stories and just, you know, haunted legends, ghostly folklore. In addition to running those two segments, I'm also going to be doing book reviews. So if you have a book coming out, or if you know of someone who has a book coming out and you want that book reviewed, I will be completely honest that I am truthful. I am somewhat harsh at times, but I would love to be exposed to what other people are doing out there and get the word out and put a review of your book into that magazine. So all those things are really just the setup to what we're actually talking tonight, but that's the paperwork we have to get done, the actual work. There's always, and it's kind of the basis of tripping on legends, there's always a reason why there is a ghost story. We say all the time, you can debate whether ghost stories, whether ghosts are real or fake. But a ghost story is always true because someone believes it, right? And they spread it. And when you look at a ghost story, you have to say, all right, what are the elements around it that have molded it, right? Most ghost stories, definitely ghostly legends, people don't come out, the ghosts don't come out and say, my name is Joe, I did this, here's my backstory. So what you're doing is you're taking what people have experienced and what people have said, and you're kind of trying to find like all the loose ends to tie up, right? All the reasons to be. And it's one of those, the books do not need to be nonfiction for me to review them. Although, if it's anyone other than Amanda, it might be fiction. It has to be probably nonfiction for me to actually read it. Just want to let you guys know that, because there were some questions. When a ghost story comes up, when a ghost story arises, it's usually because of some kind of experience that happens, right? Like some place has to be, I'm not going to say haunted, but it has to be something unusual going on, something unexplained, something which defies what should be happening in a place for anyone to start making legends about it, right? Like, you don't make legends about something that has that's not relevant, right? Like, if there's nothing going on, why make up a story about it, right? So things happen. You can't conceive it. You can't contemplate what's going on. And so what you do is you say, well, this is the backstory of it. This is what's got to be going on because then it makes sense. Which is a weird kind of thing to say, right? Like, it makes sense because this other thing which makes no sense also, relates to it. But that's the nature of the beast, right? So you have, like, ghost lights somewhere, And in the course of those ghost lights, people make up a story that makes sense, whether it's a suicide or whether it's, 3 kids did this. And that's how balance is received. That's how people make sense of that which does not make sense. The 2 stories that I have tonight are really great examples of the environment around the haunting. Like the physical environment around the haunting has been what's led to the stories coming out. Being from New England, we have a rich history of witches, right? And way back in the episodes that we did in the first year, Natalie and I originally did episodes where we were like, we searched and searched and searched, and we found these 3 unrelated but witch stories, right? And we were blown away that like there was a tradition in the South of witch stories because we think of it as such a New England thing. Of course, picking on the outsider is not exclusive to anybody. Then as we got more and more into things, we had then the Swamp Witch, which of course, has been a driving force of this town as myth and things like that. On the other coast, kind of, you had the witch at Arbuckle Creek, and I started to realize that there are a ton of witches in the South, right? Like we think of voodoo priestesses and things like that come out of New Orleans, but they're all over the place. These 2 witches that we're going to talk about tonight both come out of Georgia. So Georgia's one of those places, it's kind of like, in a lot of ways, like the promised land for people in Florida, right? Like, it's that other place. I remember driving when I first moved here, and I'm talking about first moved here, before I moved back to Mass and then back here. All we had to do, and this is relevant, right? All we had to do was get to Georgia, and the gas prices would go down. That was the big thing. Like, nope, we can't refill. We got to trudge on. We've got to get to that line because the gas is cheaper in Georgia, right? And for those people who are like, everything crazy happens in Florida, but if you just get to Georgia, and of course you have this merge of old world South and new up and coming things like things out of Atlanta and a college culture that is kind of like Florida but up a notch, and I'm not, well, yeah, I am insulting Florida, but I mean, like, it's like a Florida promised land, right? Like, people here vacation in Georgia. Their goal is to get to Tennessee or Georgia when they go on vacation. And the Old South really has a much more profound effect on Georgia than it does in Florida. Some people say that once you've hit Florida, once you've hit the Georgia-Florida line, I'm not talking about the band, you've almost gone too far south, right? Because there's so much of Florida that you go to, that you spend time in, is people who are not from Florida, right? The first story I'm going to talk about tonight is in Bonaire, Georgia. And Bonaire, Georgia is a small town in Georgia, but it has one big thing that draws a lot of people to the town, and that is it has a gravity hill. If you've never heard of a gravity hill, I would suggest wherever you are right now, wherever you're listening to this, put in your state, type in gravity hill, and something is going to come up. It's one of those paranormal, supernatural things, which is absolutely 100% not supernatural, but every place has them, and it is the definition of legend tripping, because it's the one legend trip people will do without having to touch ghosts, right? Like, they just do it because it's fun to do, and it works for them. So if you don't know what a gravity hill is, and before you go out and you've gone off and searched, you want to come back, a gravity hill is a place where you can park your car. You either shut it off or you turn it in neutral. Both things work. And your car slowly moves uphill. So instead of going downhill like it should, it moves up the hill. And of course, there's a reason for it moving up the hill, and there's always a story connected to it. And it usually has something to do with someone who died in that area, right? The most popular stories are of, especially if there's any train anywhere near that area, is that little kids, a bus of little kids, got struck and killed by a train, and now they are left on that site. They're little angels, they're guardian angels. They protect anyone who stalls out, and they push your car to safety. That's probably the most popular story that's out there related to Gravity Hills, but every location has some kind of angle or some kind of twist on that makes this unexplained event have a supernatural or paranormal twist to it. Here in Florida, we have Spook Hill. In Massachusetts, we had Gravity Hill, Magnet Hill, I believe it's called. In Bonaire, they just call it Gravity Hill. In actuality, not to ruin anyone's fun, but these are not. There's nothing unexplained going on whatsoever, except for the fact that you need some glasses. It's all an optical illusion, right? You're actually going downhill, but because of the area that you're in, it looks as if you're going up the hill, right? It's kind of like when you park your car, and then right as you're parking, the person next to you pulls out, and you feel like you're pulling it. It's that kind of effect. It has no attachment to anything supernatural. At least that's what they'd like to tell us, right? But the one in Bonaire is a little bit different. So if you go to State Road 96 East, there's an intersection with Highway 123. It's on, like, you're driving down, you pass the river. The river is called the Kamulji River. And there is a Gravity Hill. And not too far from that Gravity Hill, there is a little bit of a swampy area. The swampy area has a 5-foot tall stone structure. And I will post some pictures of this because it's really kind of crazy. It's just like stone upon stone upon stone, and they're all moving in different directions. And this monument, which no one really knows where the monument came from, it just seems to have been there. People say at least 200 years. It's built in honor of a witch who used to live right in the swamp near this intersection. So the story goes that at this intersection, where this Gravity Hill effect takes place, there was something evil. It's what now causes the cars to do weird things. It's what people were scared, but it was the major road in and out of town, and they would often have to travel it. And so this witch lived kind of by the side of the road. And if you wanted to cross the road carefully, if you wanted to get from point A to point B, if you wanted to essentially be able to stay on what's now 96, you would have to pay her a toll. And it wasn't like it was this crazy, like, she was the evil thing. It was the exact opposite. She had intentionally set herself up in this area to help people cross because she was fighting the darkness that was at this intersection, right? And so she didn't do it for free because she wasn't stupid. So people would have to pay a toll, and then she would gladly cast the spell, and they would pass along peacefully, and everything would be good. And the people in town absolutely loved her. And she did this for what people said was generations. Like, no one could ever tell how old the witch was. They just knew she had always been there. She had always been there to protect the road because something weird was going on there. The woman eventually dies. The witch dies. And this is kind of where the story is a little bit weird in that oftentimes bad things would happen to town. So a lot of these stories, the witch dies and then bad things happen, and then they have to like dig the witch up and like bury her upside down. It was the exact opposite here. They cherished this woman. They wanted her to be buried with honor. They wanted her to have a place in the town's history. They wanted her to be remembered. But everyone in town said it was absolutely impossible. The authorities in town said it was possible. There was no way that this woman could be buried in a Christian cemetery. Because she was a witch, right? So regardless of how nice she might have been, she wasn't allowed to be buried with the townfolk. And so they thought the only thing that they could do is to bury her near where she protected. And so they dug out a grave in this, like it is, it's in the wet season, it's pretty much a swamp. Buried the witch, and they built this monument to her, right? And to not offend anything, they didn't put any names or anything on it. They built this to her, and nothing grows near her grave whatsoever. So in the middle of this swamp, it's just this muck and gunk. Now, if you've ever been to a swamp, you know that they're absolutely disgusting, and yet they are like bursting with life, right? Like too much life. Not all of it's nice looking, but still, it's like they are generally considered ecosystems that are like just flourishing. Not in this area, in this part of the swamp, nothing will grow in a circle all the way around where this will grow. It's saying this is because she still is a witch, kind of somehow curses, but she still is doing good things. She still is doing good things for children. So, the two best legend trips that are attached to this monument, of which I totally need to go. The first is, obviously, people are still going to the Gravity Hill to this day, right? Gravity Hills are very popular. People go to the Gravity Hill. So that's kind of the first legend trip that's attached to it. But it's also said that people who are traveling on that part of the road, or people who just want good luck, actually go to the monument and they leave money. They leave a toll for the witch on the monument itself. And they leave the money there, and then they go and they hop in their cars, they do the Gravity Hill thing, and then they go on their way. Crazy thing is this, because it's now become a thing, people will put money or some kind of toll on the actual statue. So they'll put the money on the monument. They'll do the Gravity Hill thing. They'll go down the road a little bit. They'll do the Gravity Hill thing, and it'll all be fun. They'll go back, and almost instantly, the money has disappeared. So that means either someone's hanging around the swamp hiding and taking the money, or something else kind of unusual is going on. But it sounds like an excellent legend trip. It's only about 10 hours away. Anyone want to come with me? Private message me, and we will talk about taking off. I'm on vacation this week. I'm on spring break, and I'm not really much of a spring break party kind of guy. Instead, I use it to go places. The last two spring breaks we've gone on, I've gone on legend trips with the kids. I've taken them out places. And we've kind of exhausted Florida. I'm trying to get them to go on this one, but, you know, my son now works. Ella's, you know, got this popular thing, that popular thing. She's got all these rehearsals. It's really hard to get out there. So I'm thinking out, but if I'm thinking that I might have to go by myself or find a trustworthy and just about crazy enough as me person to check out these places, because there are about 7 places all in this one little section of Georgia near Macon that I want to check out. So the first one is that Gravity Hill, the Witch of Bonaire. It reminds me of Dora the Explorer and the Pukwudgie that protects the bridge, and like all of these great legends that talk about having to pay the toll across the bridge. But again, this is something that, like, just for that story to be passed along means that something weird is going on in that area. Why else would they have so quickly labeled it as evil? Evil enough that it needs its own guardian witch to help them, right? If you travel about an hour away, you will find the grave of one of my favorite warriors, Flannery O'Connor. If you don't know who she is, she's kind of one of those people who's not taught anymore. It's amazing living in the South, and no one I know has heard of her, and including teachers that I know, and I talk about it, and they're like, I have no idea who that is. And you're like, how did you get out of school without, you know, having to read? I probably quote this one line from my most favorite story of hers once a week. Right? Usually when I'm talking about someone who I think is an absolute idiot or something. And the story is A Good Man Is Hard to Find, which, as far as I know, she coined that phrase. children, and then the grandmother. And the grandmother is kind of the primary person of the story. He takes them off. They fall into a ditch. It's a whole big thing. And he takes them off one by one until the only person who is left is the grandmother. And the grandmother is trying to convince him that he is a good man. And she knows he's better than this. She knows he's better than just a serial killer. And she's essentially begging for her life. And spoilers. It's only 10 pages. Spoilers. They kill her too. He's got like a little posse with him, these two other guys. As you've seen the pictures, now you know what that is. And the misfit, this serial killer, says, I don't know, this is not a direct quote, but it's the essence of what he says. She would have been a great woman if she had someone standing there to threaten to kill her whole life. Love that line, love that idea. The idea that, like, in her last moments, she was a good woman, but only because there was a gun to her head. I say that all the time when I'm talking about people who seem to be good, and then kind of like, you know, they stab you in the back, or like you hear all this drama going on. Miss O'Connor is buried in Memory Hill Cemetery. Memory Hill Cemetery in Milledgeville, Georgia. It's interesting because I love doing the research. I love getting out there and exploring places, but also I love looking at archive footage, looking at these stories that are online and anything you can find in newspapers. And it's funny that there is so much cross-pollination with this story, with this cemetery, and these stories, that there are two other places that claim the exact same stories, and it's just because the names get crossed, which is really kind of interesting because these pages that I went to seem to be like reputable paranormal sites talking about ghosts in the area, and the way that one of them Fayetteville, Ohio. I would like love to go there anyway. Fayetteville, this is abandoned. Like, wait for that part, but we don't judge. Milledgeville is kind of a token of the Old South. I mean, literally, it is like the representation of what Georgia used to be. It was the state capital from 1807 until 1868. And it was switched, right? So in 1868, post-Civil War, Georgia kind of wanted to go in a different direction. It wanted to change its image. It wanted to be part of the New South and not reflect the Old South. And so this very small town, Milledgeville location was switched to Atlanta to reflect this kind of new metropolitan feel to it. And this was what, Georgia was going to be now post-Civil War. But it's this absolutely beautiful cemetery that has three really interesting legends going on. The first is of William Fish. William Fish and his family are buried in a mausoleum, this red brick mausoleum, although it may have changed because they had to renovate it because so many people were finding, were doing things to kind of legend trip this mausoleum that they've recently done some new things to it. He died in 1843. And it depends who you ask and where the story comes from, because he either died from suicide or he died of a broken heart. What happened is that his wife and his daughter both died from typhus. Now, it's been misprinted some places being typhoid. Because of the tie, they're like kind of the same thing, but they're actually not. I think like one's viral and one's bacterial. They actually died of typhus. And other places actually have it even listed as yellow fever. But the actual medical records, because they do exist, said that they died from typhus. And he was brokenhearted. They were the loves of his life. He was empty without them. And in his grief, hashtag haunted love. Hashtag haunted love. In his grief, he started to build this mausoleum as a memorial to them. People said that there was actually some kind of healing in the work, right? Like, as he was building this place which would hold their bodies, it actually was cathartic for him. It was like he was actually feeling closer to them. He was feeling as if he was doing something to benefit them. And he put his love into every brick, and he built the entire thing up. And then he would sit in there. And he would sit in there in a rocking chair and just kind of be with the dead women of his life. It reminded me a lot of the Devil's Chair, and that idea of like these seats were built to be in a place of mourning, right? To be almost hold vigil over the dead. Kind of like, if my sister is still listening, her husband's cemetery benches that he wants to build, cemetery chairs. But it didn't work. It didn't heal what needed to be healed from him. And so he ended up, two different stories, he ended up building up the wall with him still inside, right? The last bricks with him on the inside. And then he sat in his rocking chair and he rocked until he died. And no one has ever been able to go into the mausoleum itself to see, because it's sealed off, to see that he ever did die, right? Even though this is, we're talking 170 years later, 180 years later, he's said to have died, and his ghost is still in there rocking in the chair. Now, there's another report that he actually bricked himself in and then stood in the middle of the mausoleum, took out a gun, and shot himself in the head. Those are the two stories that exist. Now, if you go to this cemetery and you go to the mausoleum, you can sometimes still hear that rocking chair kind of creaking and creaking as he continues to hold vigil in his grief. You sometimes can go, and if you knock 3 times, you will actually hear the gunshot. So a gunshot will be heard from inside the mausoleum. Another really good legend that's attached to it is that if you go and you knock 3 times, you will hear from inside the mausoleum something knocking 3 times in response. So it follows this really great tradition of the 3, right? Like, nothing says ghostly legends quite like the number 3. But there's also this idea that he sealed himself in sadness, and he will respond to you, and that whole go to a cemetery, do something, something will come back at you. That idea of like he's almost inside as a mirror from the dead to the living. Then there's also this story that is connected to it that says if you go and you are standing right next to the mausoleum and you shout out, "What are you doing, Mr. Fish?" You'll hear a voice from inside the brick mausoleum shout back at you, "Nothing at all." Right? And so the deal is that people go to this cemetery. They knock 3 times. They hear a gunshot, maybe, or they hear the knocking back. They try to have a conversation. Other people said that if you can say, "How is your day going, Mr. Fish?" and he'll say, "It's fine, just fine." But there's definitely this idea that maybe William Fish is still alive, right? Like all of these years later. And of course, we know that the mausoleum has had to have been opened up, right? We know that they're renovating it, so there has to have been some kind of entrance to it. So we know that there's no body embalmed on a rocking chair in the middle of this in the middle of this mausoleum. What more, William Fish died before his wife and his daughter. So in actuality, There is no such thing. Uh, uh, there is no weird thing going on there, right? Like it's just one of those things where this mausoleum has somehow engaged the imagination of the community, where they feel as if something weird is going on with this, and yet people are still going and doing this and getting responses, and it's like the thing to do in Milledgeville is to go and talk to Mr. Fish and to knock on the mausoleum door or mausoleum wall. Some people say, and this is going to fit in with kind of like the third thing that goes on in this cemetery, that any of the ghostly activity there has to do with the members of a local mental health facility that are buried there. So as part of this larger cemetery, there are unmarked graves for the local asylum, right? And it's always referred to as an asylum. So essentially, and we've experienced this a lot with different asylums. I'm thinking Taunton State, I'm thinking Met State. These places where when people would die, they would bury them on the grounds of the asylum. For one reason or another, the paupers that were in this one, the ones that were unclaimed, actually went to a cemetery. They were buried within the grounds, and I think it has something to do with the distance, because they were so close to each other. But a lot of people feel that the weirdness that they feel in the darker part that they feel in the cemetery definitely has to do with the asylum and the people who are kind of buried there for all eternity and are the ones who are causing these little weird things that are going on. Making it so that when things happen in the cemetery, they automatically go to a negative source, right? So we all know, it's the first question I always ask. I say it all the time. First question I always ask anyone when I'm talking to them about a paranormal experience, and I'm like, are you scared because it was scary, or are you scared because it was not supposed to happen? And almost always the response is because it was not supposed to happen, right? Most of paranormal experiences are weird because, or scary because they're not supposed to happen. It's not as if the walls are bleeding. It's not as if, something's trying to kill you. It's the fact that your keys aren't supposed to move and they moved. Or there's not supposed to be a knock on the door and there's a knock on the door. It's the unusual part of it. It's the unexpected part of it, which makes it scary and intimidating. I think the same thing goes here. I think that people assume that there's something dark in the cemetery because of these unmarked graves. And so we're going to find out that gets kind of connected to the last guy that we're going to talk about. But before we get to him, there's a much better, a much friendlier, I guess you could say, ghost in a way. And it's one of those, like, don't be, if you could make yourself perfect, don't be an outsider, don't be a minority, and don't be a woman. Because if you are a woman and you're a strong woman and you're a popular woman, people will always find a way to knock you off your podium quicker than they would a man. And one of the easiest ways, especially if we're talking 100 years ago, one of the easiest ways to do that would be to besmirch someone's honor after they're dead. And one of the worst things you can do, especially if you have evidence, one of the worst things you can do is you can call someone a witch, right? If you can say, for some reason, this person was a witch, then you've kind of got, like, it's believable, right? Even though we're talking somewhat modern times, Dixie Haygood, in death, is considered a witch. There is, oftentimes you say, there's nothing about the person's life that would have ever pointed at that. No one ever referred to her as a witch in her lifetime, right? Like, she was actually a golden child. She was the hit of the town. Very popular. She became world famous. And for some reason, after her death, probably more based on what she did in her life. In retrospect, people started to kind of, give the evil lion spit 3 times and make crosses and avoid her grave. Dixie was born, actually, Anna Jarrett, and it's spelled different ways, different places, in 1861. So it's kind of important to remember the context, right? We're still talking pretty much these people, both William Fish and Dixie Haygood cross over each other a little bit. She's born in 1861, so at the beginning of the Civil War. By the time she's of age, she's living in the New South. And at 17, she marries George Haygood, so she becomes Anna Haygood. She was a petite woman, especially at 17. She was petite. She was 100 pounds. She was like a little bit pixie, right? And this actually intensified what she became famous for. So, inspired by this woman, or I should say this girl named Lulu Hurst. Lulu Hurst would tour around the South, especially, and she was a large woman who, as a teenager, at 15, she would do these fits of strength that were beyond just like she would lift heavy things, right? She seemed to have this supernatural, paranormal power to her. But she was a big woman, right? Everything that I've read about Lulu said that she was, it wasn't that far-fetched, but for some reason, Anna completely became enthralled with this woman, and pretty soon after getting married, she changed her name to Annie Abbott, and she started going on the road, kind of mimicking what Lulu had done and perfecting it. As a matter of fact, Harry Houdini, who was not a big fan of this kind of performing, of these weird feats of strength, he actually said that that Annie, which I'll refer to her as Annie from now on, Annie was the best of these. She kind of took what Lulu had done, perfected it, added showmanship, and put it out there in a great way, in a very entertaining way. So she would do these absolutely crazy physical things that no one could figure out what was going on. She would ask men to sit on a table, right? Up to 4 men sitting on a table, and then she would lift it in the air. She would lift it up. And if you look at the pictures, there's pictures of it. She would put her hands flat on a pool cue, right? And then she would have these men who were much larger than her, sometimes 2 or 3 men, try to lift the pool cue, and she would just put her hands like this, flat on the pool cue, and they couldn't move it. They could not get it up. They could not move it whatsoever. It's said that she could move pianos either with her mind, or she could actually just tap the piano and move it across the room. She could move furniture like that. And then the other part is that she, if she wanted to, could not be moved, right? So she would offer up money to the crowd and be like, if you can lift me up, you get all the money. We'll go 10 to 1. You put $1, I'll put $10. Those are not the actual prices, but you put, and then lift me up. If you can lift me up, you take all the money. And no one was ever able to lift her. Now, we all know that trick, right? We all had, if we didn't do it ourselves, then we had this kind of, we've seen it. It's a very elementary school, middle school thing where, you'd have your arms like this, and if you put your arms like this, it was harder to lift you up. And that's what people said. People said that there was absolutely nothing having to do with her. She was not supernatural. She was not paranormal at all. It was, and this is a quote here, she had a knowledge of leverage, inertia, and the deflection of forces. And that a lot of it had to do with the way she was able to, create angles on things and deflect energy, and also in the same way harness energy. and find out the center of gravity, and then you add a little bit of charm to that, a little bit of showmanship, and it seems as if like she could do these things, right? It reminds me of like, you know, we have Coral Castle, and this idea that there's these huge monuments in that place, and no one ever saw him work on them, right? They seem to just appear overnight, and that he had tapped into the ancient arts of the Egyptians, which of course I think was slavery, which they used, but still, and this was the same kind of thing, like this idea that if you just knew how to create leverage and use inertia, that you could do these ridiculous feats of strength. But there could have been something else going on as well. I've been doing a lot of research over the last couple of weeks for a friend of mine who had some really bad experiences, and who's I'm just going to be honest, like her son suffers from autism, and in the course of some very intense things that have happened, he seems to have, in a somewhat even coma state, have started fires, moved things, and so I've been dialed into this idea of our mind being able to have this power. And then of course I do that, and then, you know, I see the trailer for Firestarter coming out. And I'm like, oh, love it. But it's this, you know, we're talking poltergeist theories, we're talking, you know, telekinetics, and this idea that a mind that is off norm, and that's, I'm going to leave it as broad as that. A mind that is off norm may have the ability, or may have like a greater ability than the average mind to pop things, right? To actually be able to use that mind to move things, to see other places, and that, you know, this idea of whether it's a near-death experience, or whether it's the communication of a child with spirits, and the ease with which that happens, or people who have suffered from brain trauma, having poltergeist activity, even having, you know, this idea of possession attached to brain abnormalities. She had epilepsy, right? So little Annie suffered from epilepsy, and she would often go into these epileptic trances. So not seizures the way we would think of them, but these kind of weird trances. And then that may be where she kind of got her power from, right? Like that there actually was, you know, we're going to call it paranormal, right? Or supernatural, but it's kind of like, you know, what people study when they study parapsychology, this idea of, can our minds do that? And is an epileptic brain different, and can it create different vibes, different energy? Can it control things differently than a more stable mind can? Whatever the reason was, she became famous, and little Annie Abbott became known as the Georgia Wonder, or, and this is my favorite nickname of hers, the Little Georgia Magnet. Now keep in mind, when I was talking about Lulu, I ain't gonna judge. Lulu was a big woman, right? She was a sturdy woman, and she was, you know, people were baffled that she was doing certain things because she was so young. Lulu did it her whole life, and she was 100 pounds, right? So she was a little woman, and she was able to do these absolutely crazy things. She started in 1885, so like officially she kind of started doing this. She kind of perfected her act. Her and her husband hit the road, and by 1890 she was famous. Now, it's important, we've got to keep all this in context. This is the time of the rise of spiritualism. This is when is leading into the psychic research societies of England and also the United States. The idea of telekinesis, the idea of the paranormal as being something that could be understood and studied, was and its connection to spirituality. This is where it kind of rises in America and over in Europe as well. Want to have a wicked good party? Like, bring in a seance, right? Have a seance. This is the time of table tipping and the Fox sisters. And the idea of using ghosts as entertainment, and that it was within people's reach to talk to the dead and to learn from the dead. And so this, as an extension of that, in that atmosphere, became very popular. It's crazy. Like, you wouldn't think, like, obviously don't have streaming services, don't have, this is what people did for entertainment, right? And so this woman, little Annie, the Georgia Magnet, she performed for Kaiser Wilhelm III, for Franz Joseph, the Emperor, for Tsar Alexander, before, for Queen Victoria, right? So the Victorian era, she toured Europe for 2 years solid, performing for monarchs, performing for emperors and czars. She actually, in one epileptic fit that she was having, was able to find these pearls, like, to the exact place, these pearls that Queen Victoria had lost. So she was considered not just like this little kind of trick pony thing. This was a real thing. People thought she had real power, and they loved her for it, right? And she went around touring Europe for 2 years. She came back to Georgia as powerful, right? As this kind of celebrity, which she was. She was making money off doing this. Imagine being able to just, like, go around and, like, throw pianos around the house for for money. This is what she made her fortune in. Unfortunately, she died in 1915. So her reign was not too long on this earth, right? She had, like, her little bit of fame, and then she came back. She was still touring, but then unfortunately she died in 1915, and it was in the newspapers, right? Like, this was something that was not. She was not obscure by the time that she had died. She was still in people's minds and was still extremely popular. But somewhere along the line, this changed, right? And you can actually go and you can read her obituaries online, and it's, they're all extremely positive. But for some reason, her grave was unmarked, right? So when she was buried with her husband, who had died a few years before her, and eventually her son. So there's 3 graves, and it's her husband, and then the son. It was unmarked. That basically no one could go and mourn the little Georgia Magnet, because no one officially knew where her grave was. Or at least I should say the headstone, there was nothing on the headstone. There was a headstone there. Her husband's did have something on it, but hers was not. And it started to, people wondered why that happened, right? And there's no official reason as to why this grave went unmarked until 1991, right? So we're talking 70 something years without being acknowledged, right? Without her grave being acknowledged. People started to say it was because she was a witch, that she was buried in this Christian burial. So the witch idea is coming back around. She was buried in this Christian cemetery, but she was a witch. And so they really couldn't celebrate the fact that she was in the cemetery. They couldn't advertise it. And then the stories started to circulate. And the stories circulate that when she died, right when she was about to die, she put a curse. Now, the unusual thing is that there's nothing in her life that said that she ever harmed people, or had a bad attitude, or was upset with people, or angry with people. But after this whole grave mix-up, this curse began to be spread, that she had said that anyone who puts themselves between her grave and the sun will have evil follow them, right? They'll have bad luck. So essentially, you can't go to her grave and cause a shadow, right? You have to, if you're going to go visit, you have to make it so that it's either the sun is down, don't go to the cemetery at night, or you have to make sure that you are facing an opposite way from it, or far enough away from it, that your shadow is not on her grave, because if it falls, you're going to have bad luck. Evil is going to follow you out of that cemetery and stay with you for an indeterminate amount of time. Probably you'll have to go buy some Georgia magnets and keep the magnet woman away by changing the fields, changing the polars. It seems kind of unusual. It seems kind of weird. And actually, in 1991, when they put her... when they finally did put a headstone up for her, they put it on the wrong grave. They actually put it on the son's grave by mistake instead of actually putting it on hers. I think because she was the famous one, they put it in the middle, and she's not buried in the middle, whatever the setup is. Seems like it's a crazy idea, except for the fact that right next to where the Haygoods are buried, is the Yates family plot. And every year around Christmas time, a hole appears between the two families' graves, right? It's almost as if the little magnet, Annie, the Georgia magnet, is trying to suck the Yates family down into hell or something. Like every year, this hole appears, and it's like a documented thing. Every year, this hole appears between the two of them. Now, one of the rumors is that she put a curse specifically on the Yates family when she was alive. John died in 1911, and they said that they knew each other, and that he had done something wrong to her, and so she kind of cursed him. And so it's like, boom, gonna fall into it. Every year they fill the hole back in. And then every year, the hole appears again. And this has been happening for years. Like, enough so that it's actually a thing. And it's actually said that some people say it's the opposite, that the Yateses form this hole because for some reason they are trying to stay away from her. And so they're creating this hole so that it keeps her away from it. Trust me, maybe Leah, I am ready to go to both of these locations right now. So I would more than love to hit the road tonight to get to these two locations. It's only a 10-hour drive. So it creates this whole atmosphere of her afterwards. And it's, we've talked about different witches and different witch ghost stories on the show before. This is one of those unusual ones. This reminds me a lot of Bessie up in Tallahassee, in that there was nothing in life that pointed at her being a witch, right? It was just this kind of... There are certain elements of her death, and specifically of her grave, that have led to this, right? But every site, and it appeared in Weird Georgia, it appears in other books, like they're repeating the same stories, they're repeating the same words time and time again with this. But it's unusual in that usually that's left for an outsider. Right, and she's not an outsider. She was loved in life. She was celebrated. She was famous. Like Bessie, she didn't seem to have an enemy in the world. The Bessie story involves maybe this, different elements. Like the Poe poem is there. If you haven't gone, you can go back and listen to that episode, the Three Witches of Florida. I think it's like episode 10 or so. there's this idea that, you know, because her headstone's facing the wrong way, because she was born in October, because there's an Edgar Allan Poe poem on her grave, like all of these point of like her husband had built this memorial to her, that makes her a witch. And in the same way, because Annie has this kind of weird sink thing, and the fact that her grave was not marked for some reason, she's grown to be a witch. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because especially when she's dead, you can say, well, how did she do those things, right? Because by the time this starts to gain traction in the community, we don't have an understanding of epilepsy, right? So if you combine these weird things, weird in terms of the day, weird things that she would do, along with these seemingly supernatural feats that she would be able to do, like how could she do them if she wasn't a witch? And of course, coming out of spiritualism, a lot of pushback was anything that seemed to touch spiritualism was pushed back up against different aspects of Christianity. So, and of course, they're the ones that are writing the tales at that time. So she gets kind of dubbed with this, and so she's part of this. We have William Fish and his grief. We have these asylum people who are buried in unmarked graves. We have the Magnet Woman, who the 100-pound witch who could move men and pianos with her mind. All of these things are kind of swirling around in Memory Hill Cemetery, which is why, perhaps, that Pleasant Taylor thought that the cemetery was pure evil. This is something that's once again been repeated time and time and time again, that Mr. Taylor thought that there was something bad about this. Now, keep in mind, he dies in 1896, so he dies before Annie. I would think, and this would probably be some good research to follow up on before I actually go to this location, I would think before the asylum, but I'm not sure on that. But he, in life, thought that this was cursed land. This was bad land that should be salted, not consecrated. Why he then gets buried there, I'm not quite sure. The only thing I can think of is because of the number of Taylors that are actually there. Maybe it was a choice between family and not family, right? Like being buried there with his family or not. His wife precedes him in death. Her name is Elizabeth Taylor, different Elizabeth Taylor. This Elizabeth Taylor only had one husband. For reasons that I cannot explain, that are not stated anywhere, when Pleasant, who didn't seem like he was all that pleasant, when Pleasant dies, he is buried in the cemetery. So he actually ends up being buried in Memory Hill Cemetery. But it's okay, because he had a plan. He and the entire Taylor family are surrounded by this iron gate, which is said to protect him and his family. And it's protected with 87 devilish imp, these metal devilish imp heads and bodies that surround the gate of his where him and his family are. So the entire family plot is surrounded by this metal gate with these little imp faces, these devilish imp faces that are said to ward off evil spirits. They're said to scare off evil spirits. Now, imps in general, when you're dealing with cemeteries, are a sign of mortality, right? Imps tell us that we are going to die. They're often confused with cherubs, and cherubs represent they're the guardians to heaven. So in the Bible, cherubs were kind of stationed all outside of Eden. So when Adam and Eve tried to get back into Eden after being thrown out, they would be confronted by these cherubs who would keep them out, which is hilarious, right? Because we think of cherubs, we think of them staring off into space, right? And we think of Cupid, and we think of love, and when actually there were these kind of, rough and tough and kind of, you wouldn't want to run into a cherub, and they were sent specifically out to guard Eden so that humans could never get back in. And so to put a cherub on a grave, like if you go to cemeteries, you see pictures of cherubs all the time. The cherubs are meant to almost be like an offering, that this person will be allowed into heaven because they have an actual cherub protecting their grave. Like, it's almost like this cherub talks to this cherub and they're allowed into heaven. Hooray. Imps are kind of along the same line in that, they're there to represent that we will die. But they scare shit off, right? So if they're faced inside, then they're scary. But if they're faced outside, they keep the evil forces out, because the whatever is in that cemetery, which is somehow alive even though it shouldn't be alive, they're faced with their own mortality. They're faced with the fact that they're dead, and they're scared shitless. They don't want to cross that fence because they don't want to interfere with the actual cherubs, right? And I mean with the actual imps. And so the evil spirits are said to leave the tailors safe from all of that bad stuff that is just hanging out in the cemetery. Except for on one night. Because if you go... I like that. Yes, cherubs are heaven's bouncers. Love it, Della. It's said that if you go to the cemetery on Halloween... So, Memory Hill is someplace I want to go, like, in the next month. So, Halloween, probably not. And especially Halloween at night, probably not, because this is like a big thing that people do. But if you go to the cemetery, you'll actually hear the imps singing, right? People have said they've heard them screaming, that their faces, these evil, devilish-y kind of faces, like they actually animate, and they actually sing, and they scream, and they'll talk to people for only that one night only. And that one night only, they're distracted, and so dark things are allowed to attack the tailors. And so the tailors have to kind of fend for themselves that one night of the year. But you can actually go to it, and you can ask the cherubs, you can actually ask the imps questions, and the imps will tell you like what's going to happen in the coming year, or they will give you information. Now, of course, them being devils, whether you should take that information or not, you have to take it with a grain of salt. But it's said that you will hear them sing, and you can actually ask them what you have in store for you over the next year. What's going to be in store for us in Tripping on Legends over the next year? Don't quite know, and you definitely won't know if you aren't following us on social media. So remember, after tonight's show, if you haven't yet, please go to the Facebook page, facebook.com/trippingonlegends. Make sure that you're following us on Instagram at Spooky Tripping. If you are on TikTok, trust me, there are some interesting things that are not just sexy on TikTok. We are one of them. Not only have we posted some show stuff, but we will be starting this week. I have a new camera and everything. We're going to be starting our 1 Minute Myths, where we break down some of the really great ghost stories and ghostly legends we've covered over the years. But as a challenge to me, I can only have 1 minute to kind of tell you the details of it. It has to do with Deanna's whole idea of like honor the story as opposed to the blah blah blind that I always do. So make sure you're following us at Tripping on Legends on TikTok as well. If you like the show, subscribe to it. We have over 150 episodes up there online. You can get it through iTunes. You can get it through Google Play. Basically, wherever you get your podcasts. If you like us, even if you don't like us, leave a review. Give us a rating. Tell a friend about us. That's kind of our our bread and butter, right? Where it's where we live. And keep in touch with us because, like I said, there are a lot of events that are coming up. There's going to be a lot of launch parties. I've got some stuff planned, not only in Astor but also in Orange County. Remember to pick up Haunted Florida Love Stories wherever you can. And of course, you can actually go to Amazon right now and you can pre-order your copy of Haunted Ocala National Forest. Although I wouldn't do that. I would wait to order from me so that you get my signature on it so that you can say that... well, I don't know. I don't know if there's any added value to my signature on it, but it might be worth holding off until I can do it. Keep in touch with us. June 4th, you can already start kind of ordering for the Southwest Florida Skunk Ape Conference. If you're into cryptids, this is like an ideal Florida lineup. I'm going to have all the posts, all the links to that stuff in the show notes for tonight. Follow us. See what we're doing, contribute to us, tell us your favorite story, especially if you've got an amazing cemetery ritual as I buckle down over the next couple months and finish whistling past the cemetery. For Christopher Balzano, here's hoping that all of your trips are legendary.